Greetings, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our first Thursday of the month edition of Weekly Pan-African News, presented to you by the All African People's Revolutionary Party Southwest Chapter. That music, people were commenting that the music was good. It's nice and mellow. I agree. It's like free music from Restream, so I can't give you the name. But I agree, it was pretty nice. So this is Weekly Pan-African News. We do this on the first and third Thursday of each month at 1 p.m. Mountain Time. We started doing this show 2 years ago at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. I guess it's 3 years now. 3 years ago at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, when we realized it would not be safe to gather our people in person, but we still wanted to build with y'all. We still wanted to learn with y'all. We still wanted to share revolutionary Pan-African perspective with y'all. And so Weekly Pan-African News is one of many ways we came up with to continue to engage with our community, even during lockdown times. And we're going to keep it going for as long as possible. So my name is Onya Sanu. I'm an organizer with the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And for folks that don't know, the All African People's Revolutionary Party is a revolutionary Pan-African mass socialist political party based in Africa, founded in Africa by Kwame Nkrumah. After Ghana gained its independence from British colonialism, Kwame Nkrumah gave a speech where he was like, Ghana's independence is meaningless without the total liberation and unification of Africa. Shortly afterwards, he was overthrown in a CIA-backed coup. And when he was exiled to Guinea with President Sékou Touré, he wrote the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, where he called for the formation of our organization to wage the revolutionary struggle to build Pan-Africanism and liberate our home. So that's why we're here. If you are a frequent watcher of the show, then you know that we always start off with a couple of things. First, the intro, where I talk about who the heck I am and what the heck this is, which I just did. And second, we always want to call in a revolutionary African ancestor. We do this because we live in a capitalist and imperialist society that constantly lies on us, constantly lies on our people, and constantly lies on our ancestors. And so we have the responsibility as African people fighting for liberation, as African people fighting for justice, to tell the truth about the folks that came before us, the folks that laid the groundwork that made it possible for us to be doing the work that we're doing today. So the ancestor we want to call in today is a personal hero of mine who died on this day on March 10th, 1913, and that is none other than Harriet Tubman, Miss Harriet Tubman. She is one of the greatest military minds the African liberation struggle has ever known. And that is not an exaggeration. She was a guerrilla military tactician. She led raids into occupied territories repeatedly to liberate African people. She led undercover operations like the Combahee River Raid to liberate dozens of African people. So she was a great military mind. She was also a disabled African woman, an illiterate African woman who was born into slavery and fought for her, not only her liberation, but the liberation of all of her people. So Harriet Tubman is someone that does not get her just dues. She's oftentimes like downplayed or undermined in the mainstream narrative that we get in her in these people's schools. And so it's really important to elevate who she actually was and what she actually did and what she was actually fighting for, which was the total liberation of African people from the barbaric system of slavery. So we honor Harriet Tubman as the ancestor on the show today. I'm going to have her in my heart as we proceed. The next thing that we always do in our intro is a land acknowledgement. And we don't do land acknowledgements like other people because our land was stolen too. And so we are literally going to get it back. And so when we say, I'm speaking to you from occupied Tiwa territory, we are acknowledging that the Tiwa nation still exists. This land, so-called Albuquerque, New Mexico, is still their land and they're going to get it back. That's not a metaphor, it is a promise. So we are saying that the entirety of Western Hemisphere, much of the land in Africa, occupied Palestine, occupied Ireland, Australia are all stolen land. Land was taken, land will be returned, total decolonization all around the world, period. All righty. So that was the intro. I did it fast because I'm excited for the PE segment of this show, the political education segment that we do on every single episode. This week, we have an interview with some people that are very dear to me. But first, some context about how I met them. So often, I have talked about the very first time I traveled to Cuba. It was like 3 years ago now. It feels like it was like yesterday, but it was like a while ago on the 50th anniversary delegation of the Venceremos Brigade. The Venceremos Brigade is the oldest Cuba Solidarity delegation in existence in the United States. They have for over 50 years, taken US citizens to Cuba to see the truth about the Cuban Revolution and to act in solidarity with the masses of Cuban people against the US empire's attacks on the Cuban Revolution. It was a life-changing and remarkable experience, not just because I got to see like a living socialist project that was like imperfect, but like beautiful and so much better than anything I've ever experienced under capitalism, but also because it was one of like the most remarkable feats of organizing I've ever experienced. And I'm probably like, I know it was like very stressful for like the people who did it, but it was an international trip of over 150 people that was organized by this like incredibly diligent team that had spaces for introverts, spaces for spirituality, spaces for intentional connection. It was so intricately organized and consciously organized. I was like, how is this possible? I had never seen anything like it. On the very last day of the trip, this beautiful woman sat next to me on the bus and was like, hey, we haven't talked before. What's your sign? We talked to each other for a few minutes, and like halfway into the conversation, she's like, would you like to organize with the Venceremos Brigade? And that was a wrap. I've been organizing with the VB ever since, thanks to that very direct recruitment. And so today on the show, I have two dear comrades, Rachael Ibrahim and Sulan Mlynarek, who are going to talk about the organizing philosophy of the Venceremos Brigade, specifically how they intentionally build intimacy and practice vulnerability in the context of this revolutionary work. So I'm going to bring them on and I'm going to read their bios. Sulan Mlynarek, they, them, is from the south side of Milwaukee and now lives in unceded Puyallup and Coast Salish land in the Pacific Northwest. They're a white Polish transgender, non-binary homosexual parent who always wants to shoot the shit, read books with their comrades on the back porch, and play with their kid. Sulan is a longtime labor organizer, anti-imperialist, anti-white supremacist, and communist. Yes. They believe authentic, intimate relationships are crucial for both our movements and our liberation. Sulan is on the National Coordinating Committee and the organizing working group of the Venceremos Brigade. And Rachael, she, her, is a Black, Nigerian, US-born, mixed-race cis woman living in New York City, but raised in the Midwest in a white Lebanese family. Through activism, organizing, art, and enthusiasm, Rachael passionately works across movements and socio-political priorities to center transformational healing and intersectional racial equity framework. She has been an organizer with the Venceremos Brigade since 2007. She is also the co-creator of Racial Equity and Liberation with Monica Dennis since 2010. In 2014, Rachael convened a healing space referred to as the Black Mixed Race Collective, where community members commit to address anti-Blackness and white supremacy culture within the dynamics of mixed race identity. Rachael is a base builder, a thought partner with an eye for curriculum and process design. Rachael's priorities are to embody liberatory practices and nurture healthier movement cultures. Welcome, Rachael and Sulan.
Thank you.
It's so good to see y'all. Thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show. I'm so excited to share your knowledge with our audience. We have some questions that we developed for y'all, but we are hoping for this to be an organic conversation where y'all can share your philosophy. So to kick it off, who are y'all? What do you do? And how did you come into the movement? Rachael, why don't you start us off?
Absolutely. First of all, I just want to say my cheeks are going to hurt by the end of this time together because I'm so happy. Just glad to be with you and just moved by being in this space. But Rachael, she, her pronouns. I am on Lenape and Canarsie land, or from Brooklyn, New York, on occupied Lenape and Canarsie land. And in addition to the bio, I don't want to repeat anything that's already been said. I would just say that I am an organizer, an artist. I am a creative. I am a Scorpio, Sag rising, Libra moon, all the things. So the enthusiasm, you will see that. I am both an oldest and a youngest child. I strongly believe in storytelling as a way for us to share our histories. I am both first generation and also third generation in my family in the United States. I'm a musician. I'm a creative. I'm all those things. And I think that some of my journey is of how I came to the movement space is also like my journey through understanding my own identity. And so growing up the white family, I didn't necessarily have folks who were able and willing to have the conversations that I needed to navigate the world as a Black girl. And And so what I knew is that I had access to music, I had access to the arts, I had access to people like Whitney Houston, who I was like, I love Whitney Houston, I'm gonna be her one day, and like that's my only way out. And so like that was the dream until I was exposed to other countries, until I left the United States and started to develop my own political understanding of the impact that the US was having on a global context. And I was pissed as fuck. Like I remember coming back to the US after going to Mexico, and I was like, did you know? And did you know? And did you know? And like, how can we just be studying music? Well, you know, like I was so outraged that changed my trajectory. At the time, I didn't know that I could both love music and also be an activist. And you know, I think I've come to that later in life. But that was part of my journey in coming to do this work. So I became a social worker, really mostly doing like youth organizing, youth engagement work, working to have conversations with young people that I didn't have access to as a young person. And I really made a commitment to being uncomfortable. And I think that that's so much of what this work has required of me. So the short story is from Michigan to St. Louis to New York. I was studying to become a community organizer. I was reading Asada. I was fired up, and I needed to feel, see, and experience an alternative to capitalism, that I needed to understand that something else was actually possible in a tangible way. And through a friend, I ended up in somebody's living room who was hosting a meeting about the Venceremos Brigade. And it felt very clandestine. like how did we all know each other? Like, send me an address, you show up to a place and you learn about a thing, and then you sign up. Nothing is online. And in 2007, I went for the first time to the brigade on the 38th contingent, where I got to meet Sulan, and it was transformed me, and it also felt very unfinished after going only one time. I left with more questions than answers. I still felt confused and unsure. I had so much more I needed to know, and so I really made a commitment at that time to continue to organize with the brigade. To both help it grow, and honestly, also I was coming with a lot of critique, which I can share about later. But that's how I came into the VB.
Nice. Thank you so much, Rachael. So many relatable things in there, particularly when you talked about how much of this work is feeling uncomfortable. I deeply relate to that. I feel like it's a constant, because you're like having to like push yourself and grow and challenge yourself and question yourself. So very, very key point of political development, I think, for a lot of people.
That's right.
How about you, Sulan? How'd you come into this work?
Well, I first want to say, like, thank you so much also for having us, and just like lots of deep gratitude and respect for all of the magical and important political education that you bring into the world and your crew brings into the world. Just lots of respect for the weekly Pan-African News. And yeah, I'm from the south side of Milwaukee, and like we didn't use these words, like obviously back in the day, but I'm really shaped by the direct action and the organizing and the mutual aid that I grew up with, like at strike lines, like how we fed ourselves when like the factories moved out of the south side and everybody started working at like the gas station or Panera or whatever. And also in high school, the way that we were organizing as young people, in wild, dramatic young people ways, like having riots and just wild shit like that. And then I'm also like came out very young as a queer person, and got recruited into the Young Communist League, and had a lot of political development from both like what was happening around me and my family, and then also like what was happening with me personally. And yeah, that brought me on the brigade. I went also in 2007 with a delegation of people from the Young Communist League. And it was really incredible to see what it looks like to put our praxis and our ideology in motion, and to really think about what that means in Cuba, especially because it's not perfect, and especially because being in Cuba also provides the contrast about how much fuckery is also happening in U.S. movement spaces. So that was really eye-opening for me. And you know, in 2007, going to Cuba, being on the brigade really cemented my experience of anti-imperialism, communism, and revolution. And the only other thing I would add is I'm a Capricorn sun, a Libra rising, and a Leo moon. So anytime anyone wants to talk about my Leo moon feelings, I am always here.
I don't think I knew you were a Leo moon. I'm like a little surprised.
Yikes.
Little storytelling could go a long way.
I feel like it's no shock to anyone, but like I'm an Aries sun, Scorpio rising, Libra moon. That's me, since we're doing astrology. So y'all both talked a little bit about the unique culture of the Venceremos Brigade, and it's super important for the folks watching to understand that that did not just happen, that was built. So can y'all talk a little bit about what the Venceremos Brigade is in more detail and what makes relationship building within the Venceremos Brigade unique?
Absolutely. I can kick that off, and of course, Sulan, share whatever else I miss. But always want to start by saying the VB, the Venceremos Brigade, is not an organization. We are a work project that has existed because of volunteers who continue to show up year after year after year and make the commitment. So there's no funding. There's no, like, we are a work project that is committed to over more than 50 years now. Venceremos is, in Spanish is we shall overcome. And so the intention is to overcome the blockade. And so 10 years after the start of the revolution in 1969, Fidel had called to action to have the largest economic boost needed in Cuba at that time because of the restraints and the blockade from the United States. There was a move to have the largest sugarcane harvest in history. And so in that call to action, all Cuban people were called into the fields to say, we are going to have this sugarcane harvest. And folks, movement folks, leftist folks in the United States were like, we're going to come and we're going to help, as the story goes. We're going to make sure that those office jobs and all the folks who are working in those, in those other jobs, we can fill those shoes while everyone is called to the field. And Fidel said, if you want to come and be in solidarity with us, then come to the field and work side by side with us. And so that was the first brigades of 1969 were folks who were coming to the fields to help with the sugarcane harvest. And those were like multi-week. I can't remember exactly. I want to say like 6 or 8 weeks long, where folks would go and work for like a month side by side with folks from all over the world. And just, there's a lot happening in 1969, and to see like who are we working side by side with? Like it was Cubans folks, it was Korean folks, it was folks from the United States, it was Black African American folks. It was like, when we think about working side by side in solidarity, that's what was happening. And so for more than 50 years, we have continued to go to Cuba to work side by side, physical labor, with our people, with the Cuban people, making sure that we can learn as much as we can about Cuban life and society as possible in the time that we are there. So we don't go for 6 weeks anymore. We go for 2 weeks normally. We used to, back in the day, they went by cattle. What is that? Cattle ship or cattle boat, whatever it's called. So if you can imagine what kind of trip that was, how many people really toughed it out to be able to make that journey. Now we go by flight, but we go with a lot of challenge and issue because of all the different challenges that are put into place, all the restrictions, the travel restrictions that come and go over time, over these 50 years, seeing the different ways in which the blockade has been imposed through policies and restrictions and trade and sanctions, really, right? And so our goals are to end the blockade and lift all travel restrictions, because we believe it is our constitutional right to be able to travel. Anyone from the United States should be able to travel without asking for permission from our own government to travel to somebody else's country. And so we believe it is our constitutional right to do so. Our second goal is that we believe in ending the illegal occupation of Guantanamo Bay, and that land must be returned to the Cuban people. And that our last goal is to strengthen movements for justice in the United States through exchange and collaboration with Cuba. Everything that I just said is available on our website. So our goals and our points of unity can be found. I think we're going to share a link of that. Thank you so much. And please check us out. The last thing I'll just say is that over the last 50-something years, we've taken almost 10,000 people to see Cuba for themselves, to build with us, to build relationships with us. I think it's just, I won't read the details, but I think our points of unity are really important as we think about why we do this work and how we do it. So we believe in Cuba's right to self-determination. We believe in the constitutional right of U.S. citizens to travel, move, and freely associate. We believe in internationalist struggle and solidarity. We believe in building equity and justice in the struggle against capitalism, racism, patriarchy, and colonialism. And we believe that people are not disposable. And so I'll pause there, and Sulan, I invite you to share more.
I think the thing I'm thinking to add in is, we practice our anti-imperialism throughout our work project, and part of that is also taking leadership and direction from our partners in Cuba. And so when we go there, we're never just like showing up for fun or showing up to carry out our own political agenda. We are there in solidarity, and we are there to learn. And so part of what that means is like the ask from our Cuban partners, and what is needed has changed from that time Rachael was talking about back in the day when Fidel was like, no, you also have to be in the fields with us. Like, we still do manual labor every time we go, voluntary manual labor, because that's requested of us. But they also say, like, bring people so they can see it for themselves, and stress again and again how important it is to get people from the United States to come to Cuba. And they always talk about, we're never against the people of the United States. Like, we're only against the government, and have really just incredible analysis about how to be in solidarity. And so I guess that's the other piece, is like, we're an anti-imperialist group. We go in that manner, and part of our learning is to learn what it means to be in a country that's having continuous revolution over the last 60 years, and what does it mean for us to have revolutionary anti-imperialist solidarity. How do we bring that back to our movements here?
That's right.
I definitely agree that, so I thought I was an anti-imperialist. I say this all the time. I thought I was an anti-imperialist before I went to Cuba, and then I went to Cuba and I was like, nah. One, because I realized that I didn't really understand. I didn't understand what I was actually saying when I said anti-imperialist. I didn't understand what the impact of imperialism looked like until I saw the impact of the blockade, and I saw the Cuban resistance to it. The other thing is that the acts of solidarity that you're all describing, like working in the fields, like the things that we were fed, we were picking in the morning. We were working side by side with Cuban people, building genuine relationship with them. We also, the organizing team of the Venceremos Brigade, the 50th, organized the donation of a large amount of mutual aid, material aid that was donated by brigadistas. So we brought things to Cuba that they could not get, again, because of the US blockade. And so taking actual action, instead of just saying I'm anti-imperialist or theorizing about anti-imperialism, is a really transformational experience. And how it makes you realize that this is something that we have to build. We have to build anti-imperialism. We can't just say we're anti-imperialist. Okay, so we will have questions at the end, but I just wanted to get on y'all radar that people are asking, how can we go to Cuba with the Venceremos Brigade? Because you're already selling it so well.
Good question.
Okay, but yeah, we are actively planning the 51st Brigade right now, and we'll definitely share more details later on. But thank you so much for that question. We're excited that you're interested. So next question I want to ask, the Venceremos Brigade has an extremely unique culture, something that is very, very deliberately built, and something that is rare among political organizing, particularly revolutionary political organizing. People know me. I am not a feelings focused person. I'm like very business focused, but the experience of being part of the Venceremos Brigade, being exposed to the two of y'all, helped me realize that like business versus feelings is like a false dichotomy. It's a false dichotomy. So the question I have for you is, what is the culture of the Venceremos Brigade and why was it built this way?
I can kick off this one and then I pass it to Rachael. So like fundamentally our culture is expansive and it's growing. It's founded on embodied liberation and our practice of revolution, and that, we have a strong core, a strong foundation, but it also changes every single brigade because we are informed by the relationships that come on the brigade. And so, Oni's first brigade was like, I don't know, like 150 people. It was like a lot of people, which is like a totally different vibe than some of our brigades that are like even bigger, or some that are smaller, like 50, tens of people you have to be around. So every brigade is different and every brigade is shaped in that way. But we really do have this like simultaneous culture. One part is really informed by the leadership of Cuba and Cuban people. When we go to the Central Defense of the Revolution, which is like a magical name and magical expectations for like the Black clubs in Cuba, that like a lot of the organizing, a lot of the community work, a lot of the care happens at those places. We're informed by the way schools and clinics are set up. We're informed by the revolutionaries we meet talking about their ongoing resistance and ongoing struggle for liberation. And we also are informed by the culture we have back at home, which is founded by a lot of Black brilliance, brought mainly into our brigade by work that Rachael did in partnership with Monica Dennis and Heidi Lopez. And of course, standing on the shoulders of all of the brigadistas that came many, many decades before us. So I'll pause there, and then I want to talk about vulnerability and intimacy, but maybe the next one.
Yeah, to your point, Sulan, like the evolution of the brigade's many cultures, right? Like has, I'd say a couple of things that come to mind that are like really specific to what has shifted over specifically the last 10 years has been like the shifting of our structure. So when we think about how we are building relationships structurally, when we have like now we have like local committees, have always been national, but it's been very like Eastern, Northeast specific. And so when we think about the cultural influence of being Northeast specific, when we think about having enough of a structure where how do we exchange ideas on a national level? That has been something that I think, especially with the evolution of technology over the last 10 years, like fortunately we were ahead of the Zoom curve when the pandemic hit, because we've been doing it this way for a while. So when we think about like these types of things that inform the ways in which we've been building relationship and building culture over time, how we've had to do legal training and like how do you prepare people for civil disobedience? How do you prepare people to do a border crossing and face U.S. customs without having to meet people in person yet? And so having to use technology and videos to help to build those relationships of who are you going to be walking side by side with? Who are the people who are going to have your back, who you can ask questions to, who've done this before, who it's their first time, who maybe have a history of being stopped by the police. And so how do we need to know what people's triggers and activation points are? And how are we sharing resources and understanding people's different needs? Is all part of how we've been having to build and shape the cultures of the VB. I would also say like we've to develop more sustainable and effective accountability practices. For example, like transformative justice. Like, yeah, sure, shit goes down and we respond, which I would actually say we react, right? We react. And then it's like, okay, there's so much happening, on to the next. We didn't have enough systems in place for us to actually be responsive to the harms, the hurts, the discomforts, the things that happen when people are put in a pressure cooker situation, like traveling for the first time with 150 people to another country, right, where we are trying to see and feel socialism and see and feel another way of life, while simultaneously knowing we have to come back to the belly of the beast to do this work, while we're bringing a lot of our shit from the US to this other country. So, building our relationships are on, do we need affinity spaces? Because how are we building relationships to be accountable for our behavior? Where might we need some spaces to decompress, to reflect, to process, to vent on the many layers of experiences we may be having, not only with other brigadistas, but in addition to being in the context of Cuba, in the revolution, being challenged with our ideology of racism isn't the exact same thing here. How do we process that? How do we talk about it? And do I have enough relationships with people to not only talk about it from a reactive place, but be able to talk about it in a really productive way that can allow for conflict? I could go on and on and on, but I just want to name also the VB has a complex history of, how we have and have not built healthy relationships. And so a lot of the work that we've done over the last 10 years is how can we do this better? How can we do this differently? What do we know now that we didn't have access to before? So also trying to undo, repair some of those harms. No, we're always getting. So that's also been part of the work.
Thank y'all so much. The thing that came up for you that was talking that I feel like it's really important for people to understand is that Cuba is an official enemy of the United States. The United States is attacking Cuba in a variety of extremely comprehensive ways. And so there is a risk in taking this trip that people have to understand that we are deliberately moving against the political objectives of the most dangerous empire on the planet. And so that is actually very fucking stressful. You've never done it before. And so the necessity of building trust, of building deep relationships and openness is very, very, very clear because we have to have each other's backs in that kind of context. The other thing that came up for me in terms of the VB's culture is the prep process, the Brigadista prep process. That was one of my first introductions to y'all, my first introductions to the culture of the Venceremos Brigade. And it was extremely impressive. It was 3 months long, I believe, 3 sessions where we talked about the history of U.S. and Cuba relations, where we talked about what it's like to visit a socialist country from an imperialist country and not act like an asshole, where we talked about Cuba's old ass pipes, where we talked about what to do if we get sick, what to do if we get harmed. It was extremely, it was a way of inoculating us. We had been steeped in capitalist bullshit for a very, very long time. We were headed to a context that had been demonized within that capitalist context, but was very, very, very different. And so it allowed us to be open to being wrong about everything, to be open to the experience and to learning from the Cuban Revolution and the Cuban people. So do y'all have anything to share about how that prep process came to be?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I remember my first time going on the brigade and I didn't know what I was getting into, right? I knew that I signed up to go to Cuba with a group, and I knew that I was going in maybe an unconventional way, right? Going in civil disobedience and that was new for me at the time, in my early 20s. And so sitting in those prep sessions and having folks ask questions that had me look at myself, look at each other in a way that was preparing us for this was really profound. And this is also my life's work, right? My life's work is also how do we build healthier movement spaces? And so I was really, this was one of those areas that I had a lot of arrogant critique. I wasn't necessarily coming in with gratitude and appreciation for the work of the people who had come to do this work for 40 years prior to me getting there. And I was coming in with well, we could do this better. We could do this better. We don't have enough Black people in here and blah, 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 blah. I was so in it, which it doesn't mean I was wrong, but there's a different way to come about it. Could have been more collaborative. And I only know that now and being able to reflect back and continuing to hopefully grow and improve. But the prep process has always been an evolution of there's so much we know we want to do to prepare people. It is really hard to get people to commit to the amount of time that we believe is necessary to do that well, and to make sure that people are having enough touch points with each other to feel connected before we arrive, and doing that 99% virtually before we arrive. And so I'd say when I first got involved, it was the brigade was always national, but by the time I got involved, it was majority East Coast. And so a lot of our prep sessions were all in person. And so we did get to like touch, feel, know each other in a very particular type of way before we got there. But we still had conflict, and we still had challenges, and we still it'd be like, did this person ever go to the prep session? Like that. I don't know if everybody went to the same meeting because we were all there. And then over time it evolved into like conference calls, and like, how do we make sure we have more people from across the country represented on the brigade in Cuba? And also, how do we prepare people who we can't train in person, and specifically around the legal aspects of what can we not do online? What, because of security purposes, are limitations to our ability to do relationship building well. And so eventually video conferencing became the next way, and trying to find more ways for us to be engaging with how we're getting people to be in that self-reflective process, knowing that not everybody who comes on the brigade is coming as part of an organization. They're not always coming as part of a collective or a community where they can be held accountable when they return. They're not always coming from a place where, some people are coming to build their political ideology on the brigade, not necessarily having done that work prior to coming. So given that we have such a diverse array of people coming into the community, the prep process has had to evolve.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other thing I would add is I think that it feels like there's the balancing of like ideological development and also like the skills we need to know, like Rachael had talked about earlier, like the transformative justice process that we've been building the brigade. And I think, that's the other part of it, is like when we go to Cuba, we also have to confront the trauma of being in a place where we feel like safer and we feel cared for, and it's really scary and it's really exposing. And so a lot of people, like all their demons pop up, and you see people's like coping skills that they've developed over here. And so I think, part of the building and prep session is obviously the logistics, and it's the ideological part, and it's the community building part. But I think it's also like Rachael is talking about, like grounding people together as a group and really trying to figure out how to prep people with like the interpersonal skills and the individual skills that they need to really be able to be part of a collective.
Yeah, I'm not an extroverted person. People never believe me, but I'm not. I don't like to be bothered. And even on the Venceremos Brigade with like 150 people, we were like there's like 4 of us in a room. There was like never a point where it felt overwhelming, because there were always spaces where I could like go to decompress. And when I had the capacity to like want to like reach out to people and build, there were spaces to do that too. And again, that was like intentionally cultivated, intentionally created. The Venceremos Brigade was actually my first introduction to the concept of like the transformative justice pods, where you like develop like a network of people who can hold you if you've been harmed or if you yourself have caused harm, because both are going to happen throughout your life. And so like having that like framework intentionally set up before we got there and like continued throughout the trip was like, yeah, it just made me feel like really held as like an introverted kind of awkward person to be like, okay, like I can not talk if I don't want to. And if I want to talk, this is like the structure that exists for that to happen. So I just want to like impress upon people that if you are not a people person like me, then it's still a space where you can feel welcome. Also, very quickly, a comrade is asking, is it only people from the US that can join, or can folks from other places join? And I believe it's just the US, right?
Yeah, yes. And, so there are many groups that travel from all over the world, and the U.S. is the only place that has to request a license. And so the work that we're doing specifically is addressing the U.S. policy against Cuba. And so also part of the challenge is making sure that everyone we take can also come back. And so some of the challenges we have is when we go in civil disobedience, we're very mindful of not everyone has the same experience going through customs. And so when we go in civil disobedience, we only take people who are U.S. citizens to go and return. But when we go licensed, there is more flexibility with who can come on the brigade and not face the same challenges.
Cool. Thanks so much, Rachael.
Mm-hmm.
So last question I have for y'all, but like a deep question. So
Yeah.
is why is it important to build intimacy and practice vulnerability within the context of revolutionary work?
Whew. I go first, but also try not to cry on the internet. No, I'm just kidding. I wish. I would say a couple of things, and I obviously pass it. I would say the first part is like, I believe that authentic, intimate, and vulnerable relationships are crucial from a strategic level to our movements. Like one example is when we do border crossings, when we go on an unlicensed trip, it's an act of civil disobedience, and there's time periods where you are separated from the rest of the brigade, and what sustains us is our relationships, knowing who's going to come for us, knowing that our people will be there, knowing that we're part of a collective. We're not just acting on our own, but we're acting in our anti-imperialist international revolutionary solidarity. We mean our goals when we say end the blockade, lift all travel restrictions, when we say end the illegal occupation of Guantanamo Bay, when we say strengthen our movements. It's like this work to uphold our culture and divest from white supremacy and the other systems of violence that are around here in the United States. Like this is the way that we build the strategic capacity for our movements to really be able to be at scale in the way that we need to move. And, I think like it's some scary work to be able to to be perceived, like that's terrifying. But I think the ways that we are in sustainable long-term relationships, and it doesn't mean, anything inappropriate. It doesn't mean like sleeping with people. It doesn't mean any of those things. It means like I'm going to show up as my authentic self, and I'm going to take time and go really like long periods, or sometimes if you come on the brigade, intense 2 weeks of your life, to be in relationship and to really be able to walk our walk. And I think for me, that's one huge piece of it, is the strategy of sustainable movements and really being able to have a healthy, strong culture that can withstand upscaling.
Oh my gosh, I have so much I want to say. Thank you, Sulan. Yeah, like in what you're saying, Sulan, like, and it's like commitment, right? Like, what is the commitment to our rigor of practice? I feel like the brigade has lots of really smart, intelligent, politically informed people who come on the brigade, like amazing folks, and that all of us get to level up our rigor in how we practice the values that we have. And so if we want to talk about living collectively, communally, the sharing of resource, how do intimacy and vulnerability support us in doing that? Because if I don't know what your needs are, then how are we actually being in an authentic exchange of resource? If I can't talk about money, if I can't talk about, right, like food and what are my needs? What are your needs? What are our needs? What is the society that we are building? Then we actually are not in collectivity. We are not in exchange of resource. And I think about that in being in Cuba and being in a socialist society. This is critical. It's critical to know to know what we are needing. Yes. Oh my goodness. Sorry. I see there's a little private chat situation. Yes. That our ability to talk about like, how's your Pope, right? So like when we are traveling internationally and people's health. So like this, it might sound silly, but like it's real, right? So like we are traveling to a country that has experienced this blockade for more than 50 years. And so we see the impact that that has on every area of life in Cuban society, including the healthcare system. Even though they have an incredible healthcare system, we can still see the drain that we can put on their healthcare system when we go and we are not aware of that impact. So when we are able to be intimate and vulnerable with each other and talk about, how do I feel? What is my emotional, mental, physical, digestive situation? I've had diarrhea for 4 days, but I told nobody because I'm filled with shame. And now I'm just in pain quietly, trying to pretend like nothing's going on because I don't want anyone to find out. Like, that puts not only an impact on the individual, on the collective, but also on the systemic, when we're not aware of the impact that we have on the Cuban healthcare system while we're there as in solidarity. I could go on and on. So I also want to be really mindful to like not over talk this, but I think that building intimacy is also the way in which we are living into our vision of the world we want to be in. I do not want to be in a world that is void of laughter and play and satisfaction and pleasure and joy and connection and love and all of these other things. So like, if I am in a movement space, but I am withholding parts of myself, I think that that speaks to so many things of the ways that we demonize emotion, the way that we relegate it as that's just like a feminine thing, and then it's weak, and it's not the way, like it's messy and it's too complex or whatever it is. It's like, no, actually, let's put in this equitable labor together around how we are with our emotions, with our sharing, with our intimacy. And if we can build that collectively, then we could be more responsible with each other. We could hold each other accountable because we actually know what's going on. We aren't burying our heads in the sand and like, I don't know what that is. I'm not a part of any of that. That's not about me. And it's like, no, all of this is about us and how do we operate more collectively. And I think the brigade is one of the few places where I've experienced, like, in the US, we often like might work on an issue or a project or a movement space together, but we live separately. And in Cuba, we actually are living collectively for a short period of time, but it's truly an immersive experience that can be life-changing. And it's a level of an opportunity for a level of intimacy that we rarely get to have in this country that could transform the way that we organize here.
That was really beautiful, and I deeply appreciate you bringing up the poops. That was like one of the things that like being friends with y'all and like seeing the openness about everything, including that, is like actually really liberating, especially as like a woman or like a marginalized gender person where you're supposed to act like your body doesn't do like natural things. Just having people be like, how's your poop, is actually amazing. It's like liberating. So yeah, like there's just like this culture of like transparency and vulnerability that has been deliberately cultivated within the Venceremos Brigade. It's like both a revolutionary practice, like building the world that we want to see, like Rachael said. It's also like a key like operational security practice, because like if you research the history of like counterintelligence programs in the United States, for example, how they were able to infiltrate organizations like the Black Panther Party, like the Nation of Islam, what they usually did was find the people who were cornered and isolated, people who had a lot of debt or like were facing criminal charges, or for whatever reason were isolated from their community and didn't have a network of support. And those were the people they turned. We have to understand that like a lot of times like snitches or whatever you want to call them are not like intentionally bad people. They're isolated people. And so when you do these kind of practices of building intimacy and building vulnerability, that is true security culture. People think security culture is like putting your phone in the microwave. It's not. It's like learning how to talk to other people. Like learn how to talk to other people. So yeah. Before we get into any last thoughts I want to share, we do have a couple of questions from the folks watching, if that's okay. Also, there's a lot, so let me get rid of you. Okay, so first question from Emma is logistical. How can people go to Cuba with the Venceremos Brigade? One of the comrades asked me recently if they could join in coming days.
Well, like Oni was saying earlier, we are organizing our 51st Brigade this year. We're going to have some representatives on something called the May Day Brigade that's going to be going soon, and you can check our social medias for updates on that, just to like see what people's experiences. Our leadership is going to go in the summer to get prepared to take all of y'all, and then we're all going to go in the end of December and into the beginning of next year. You can hit up our website. It has contact information as well as our social media. We're at VB4 Cuba on Instagram and Facebook.
Thank you. And the next question is from our comrade Otis. In your experience, how has the VB engaged the race question in Cuba, both in prep and programming in Cuba?
Diligently, imperfectly, and continuously. So I think that the VB has, we always in prep talk about both understanding the context in which we are coming from in the United States and making sure that folks who are going on the brigade understand how race and class are interconnected in the US context and what about that does and does not translate in our experience in being in Cuba, and making sure that we understand the complexities and the differences and similarities of our histories. And so we do that prep work in that way. And then we make sure that we always have a conversation while in Cuba about race. But we also know that like the way that we phrase questions in the US don't always translate when we're in Cuba. And so part of our work is helping to build that bridge of how do we understand each other when we do have different experiences, even when there is a connection in our experience. And so it is complex. It has been challenging. It has been a place in which we experience conflict and tension, but it's also an area that we are like committed to continuing to have that conversation in an intersectional way, because it's also not, it's race and all of our identities. So we continue to do that.
Yeah. And that's definitely something that I experienced. Like, you know, we talked about how the Brigadista prep prepares us for like a radically different context. Like that was one of the places where I saw folks struggle on the 50th, simply because we have a particular understanding of what racism is and how it functions within a capitalist society. And in Cuba, racism certainly still exists, but it's different. And people had like a really hard time like unpacking what that means. And there was like distrust and like some anger and like some group conversations. And so it's definitely like it's still a work in progress. Both like helping people understand that like the US or the capitalist experience of race is not universal, and also helping people understand that it's important to study like how Cuba's experience of race came to be the way it is. Yeah. So yeah, and it's hard to have that conversation because you try to tell people maybe we don't know. They're like, "What do you mean?" So yes.
I would also say one of the ways we've worked on and having better conversations has been through affinity groups and caucus spaces on the brigade. So we self-organize while we are there, and whatever spaces are wanted and needed are created. And so that has meant inviting like white people to do their work together and having that conversation while we were there. Folks of color, Black folks coming together and also having those conversations as well.
The White Shenanigans Caucus.
Yes.
All right. Well, we're about to hit the hour, so I want to give y'all the opportunity to share any closing thoughts you would like with the audience.
I guess I just have two things. You know, first, obviously, like it's been so fun. Like I love to chat with these two, anyways, and so like. You know, but it's really beautiful to be here with all of you. Also on the different platforms. I love the questions, and the engagement is like magical. We hope to have you in the brigade. Please join us. We want you. And I think the two closing thoughts I have is something that I've been thinking about a lot is, you know, over the last couple of years, we've really been able to expand our capacity to be online and to be connected even when we're isolated. But the other part of that means that they can shut down our platforms when they please. And we see the repercussions of that many, many times over the last couple of years when there's no cell phone service, when certain platforms are down. And so really the practice of naming dynamics, of being an authentic relationship, of doing the healing work so you can show up as yourself and be ready to be in relationship, like those things truly are, you know, it is a critical time now. So yeah, I'm gonna pass it to Rachel, but just lots of pleasure being here, and like really, really invite people to join us in our work to shut down the blockade, to give Guantanamo back, and to have some mutual revolution building.
That's right. Oh my goodness, so much I want to say, and I'm not going to say it all, but my closing thought is one that when we are not choosing to be vulnerable and intimate, or building intimacy in relationships in our movement work, then we are embodying white supremacy culture. That feeds competition, fear of conflict, undervaluing our interdependence. It's reinforces respectability politics, and these ideas of professionalism is like, oh well, we can't bring emotion into our spaces. And so I would say that it is an act of resistance when we choose vulnerability. And I think the choosing piece is essential. Like, it's not like the default, it's like a choice, it's intentional, it's strategic, and it helps us to build towards the future. I want to name that, like, choosing vulnerability and intimacy in our movement spaces is about returning to our cultural practices of our people. And that is literally like recentering Black and Indigenous people of color, queer folks, LGBTQ folks. Like, how do we recenter who is most impacted by these systems? By returning to the practices of our people. And agreement, some community agreements that always help me in that is remembering depth without drowning. So like, how can I share deeply, but not drown myself and not drown the person who I'm trying to build with? And so it means being intentional with which stories I tell, and making sure that I'm being mindful of the impact that my words have. And then also relationship grace, because we're not always going to get it right. But we choose to be in relationship with people who consent to be in practice with us. And then the last thing I want to speak to is just how there's a number of distinctions in vulnerability and relationship building. That is, it's not trauma bonding. It's not about telling the most horrific stories and thinking that that's going to be the thing that connects us. But it's about how do we come from a place of understanding and take intentional risk that isn't about validation from other people. So that way we're not dumping on people. It's not about being fragile, but that we're really choosing powerfully in our vulnerability. That it is intentional risk-taking, and can also look like giving and receiving feedback. And I think that our movement spaces need more of that type of practice, where we can give forwarding, constructive feedback that helps us to be the best versions of ourselves for the future that we're trying to build in this world.
Well, I feel like I'm going to be the one to cry. It's like I'm like trying to hold it back, but this has been
hold it back, baby. Let it out.
This has been a very beautiful conversation. I hope that folks got a sense of like what a special space, what a special movement the Venceremos Brigade is, like why it was such a transformational experience for me, why I am so grateful to be in community with these comrades. Thank you so much, Sulan and Rachael, for sharing all of this knowledge and experience with our community. On the screen right now is a donation link. If you would like to donate to support the extremely important work, the practical anti-imperialist solidarity of the Venceremos Brigade, you can do so at the link on your screen, bit.ly/bbdonate. It is case sensitive. All of the funds that are donated to that link will be used to organize the 51st Brigade, including giving travel scholarships to the folks who we know need to be on the brigade. Remember, international travel is a privilege. Most people cannot afford it. And the people that most need to see the Cuban Revolution, to see socialism in practice, are poor working class people, queer and trans people, African and Indigenous and Chicano people. And so to get those folks to Cuba, we must raise money. So please donate if you have the capacity to do so. But I just want to say again, thank you so much, Sulan and Rachael. I love y'all. This has been
it is
and I know that
an honor to do this with you, and it's humbling to have you ask us to be in this with you. So anytime and always.
Yes. Thank y'all so much. And you see in the comments all the love you're getting. You blew people's minds. So appreciate y'all. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye.
Cool. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for sticking through that incredible political education segment with our comrades from the Venceremos Brigade, Rachael and Sulan. We're going to do like a brief, we're going to do a brief transition by playing a video clip before we proceed to the rest of the program. So stay tuned.
Ukraine, I stand with the Ukraine. Iraq was just a desert with people living in tents and caves. Ukraine is a civilized nation. Terrorists aren't getting bombed this time. It's people, real people, with blonde hair and blue eyes just like me. Who doesn't want to roll with the big boys? Welcome to NATO, Ukraine. But Russia has nukes pointing at us, so hit them low-key in a way that would hurt me. Their wallets. Tell the politicians to seize all oligarchs' assets. With all this extra money, you could spend our winters in Poland and our summers in New Russia. Wow, the Russian bots and propaganda is at full force, huh? All of a sudden, Ukrainians are racist? I never heard about Ukrainians being racist before. Of course they're racist. It's an all-white country in Europe. The most woke country there throws bananas at soccer players. I read one article, but choosing a side is easy. It's like the Cold War. But why are they banning YouTube ads and Facebook in Russia? They shouldn't be rewarded for going to war. Here's an explanation for us. So like back in the 90s, Russia and Ukraine used to be a thing, but then they broke up. So Russia started love bombing her with stuff like, watch out for the USA. Ukraine was living her best life, okay? Poor, hungry, and thriving. So Russia's just mad that she found a new tall light skin named NATO who has money, goes to church, and lets her beat their kids, LPR and DPR. Russia's so controlled. Got rid of everything Russian faster than they did Confederate statues. But why is there such a bloodthirsty focus on this war? What about the bombings in Yemen by American weapons? What about the American bombings in Somalia? We shouldn't be cheering on sanctions. Putin isn't going to feel the brunt of this. It's going to be the people. But I guess this country is used to making poor people suffer. This war started before a single Russian boot ever hit the ground. Let us remember that war comes in many forms. Aggression comes in many forms. And the US and NATO are masters of war without the appearance of war. Chauvinism and solipsism will cause the West to forget that America initiated a coup in the Ukraine in 2014 with the aid of fascists. Then NATO bombed Libya, Afghanistan, Yugoslavia, and turned their countries into rubble. Eastern Europe's in a sorry state today because they dissolved the USSR. And you think Russia would forget about this and allow an alliance of such history act upon its borders with weapons and troops? Russians have their own memories, they have their own interests, they're not just objects to be treated upon with US pleasure. Geopolitics is not trying to figure out who the good guys and bad guys are in this situation. Geopolitics is attempting to study the factors that lead to major events in mankind's short but violent history. If you want to figure out who the good guys and bad guys are, I recommend you read a fantasy novel.
I'm muted. So that transition was one of the hottest people I have ever seen talking about the U.S. political spectrum and each political perspective that we are seeing on the proxy war in Ukraine at this particular moment. Someone's asking who it is. I'll put it in the chat later, but he's on, or I don't know their pronouns, but they're on Twitter. They're very attractive. They have incisive political analysis. So it's just it's like a great representation, a short representation of all of the various political perspectives we are seeing on this war that's happening in Ukraine. In terms of the API peace perspective, we talked about it a little bit on the show, but we have been hyper focused on the role that NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, has played in escalating this extremely dangerous situation for both civilians in Ukraine and Russia, but also the entire planet. Because what's unfolding in Eastern Europe right now is not just simply a conflict between Ukraine and Russia, it's actually a conflict between two imperialist powers, Russia and the United States, with the United States using Ukraine as a proxy, and the situation escalating on a daily basis. As we pointed out before on this program, this did not come out of nowhere. It was predicted by foreign policy experts for over 20 years that using NATO to expand to Russia's borders was going to produce a confrontation, that forcing Ukraine into NATO was going to provoke a civil war in that country. All of this was laid out by geopolitical experts for quite a long time in clips that we've actually played on the show before. And so it's really, really important to understand for those of us living in the United States that we cannot look at any single event in isolation. We have a historical responsibility as citizens of empire to understand how the U.S. is working to destabilize the planet, how the U.S. foreign policy is working to create these extremely dangerous situations. Extremely dangerous situations. And so right now, Russia and Ukraine are in the height of a conflict, and the US and NATO are actively working to escalate the situation. They are flooding Ukraine with weapons. Many of those weapons are falling into the hands of far-right and neo-Nazi forces. At the same time, they are undermining attempts at negotiations and diplomacy between Ukraine and Russia. And what we need to do as people in the United States, as anti-imperialists, as people who believe in justice, is call for our government to stop escalating the situation. Please, for the love of God, mind your own business. Stop applying economic sanctions that are going to have a devastating impact on civilians, not just in Russia, but all over the planet. We are about to see skyrocketing gas prices. We're about to see skyrocketing food prices because Russia is a major exporter of fertilizers and grains for the entire planet. So there's going to be a serious impact on these sanctions on civilian populations, not on Putin, not on the Kremlin, not on the Russian leadership, but civilians throughout the world, including the United States, Africa, and all over the global south. So understand the sanctions are just another form of escalation. They are not pushing us toward a diplomatic resolution for this situation. We also have to call for our government to stop pumping weapons into the situation. It has already been established that there are multiple neo-Nazi regiments within the Ukrainian military that have become official regiments of the Ukrainian military. There are paramilitary neo-Nazi and fascist organizations that patrol the streets of Ukraine alongside police. This has been known by the US and NATO powers for 8 years. So when we are putting guns, when we are putting bombs, when we are putting anti-aircraft missiles into that situation, we cannot control who gets their hands on those ordinances, which means that without question, the US and NATO are arming neo-Nazis. It's not okay. It's going to become a serious problem because in the 8 years since the US-backed coup in 2014, Ukraine has become a global hub of far-right organizing. Fascists and neo-Nazis from all over the planet, including from the United States, have traveled to Ukraine to get political training and funding and weapons. And so if a situation unfolds where Ukraine is newly empowered by defeating the Russian invasion, and these neo-Nazis have their hands on all of these billions of dollars worth of weapons, the destabilization in Ukraine is going to expand to all of Europe and all of the world. So understand, again, flooding the situation with weapons, knowing there's no way to stop Nazis from getting those weapons, is an escalation of the situation. The only way out at this point, the only safe way out at this point, is diplomacy that the United States is actively standing in the way of. So again, I exhort people, I implore you to study the political and historical context of how we got to this point. Study how NATO was deliberately expanded to Russia's borders in an attempt to antagonize Russia and why that happened. Study the history of the 2014 coup in Ukraine and who was empowered after that coup happened. And study the relationship of the US and NATO, the relationship between the US and NATO and neo-Nazi and far-right forces in Ukraine. It is a very, very dangerous situation. We have to, as American citizens, as people living in the belly of the beast, put pressure on this empire to stop escalating. There are nukes in play. It's a very, very serious situation, and it keeps escalating because of the actions of the United States and European powers. So I just wanted to say that, and we're going to go deeper into it actually next week. The Albuquerque Anti-War Coalition, in partnership with the Red Nation, the Anti-War Coalition is the APIP, of course, Pueblo Action Alliance, Showing Up for Racial Justice Albuquerque, and the Red Ink Collective. And we're going to be working alongside the Red Nation and Black Alliance for Peace to organize a teach-in that's going to provide some political and historical context for the proxy war in Ukraine, talk about the history of NATO, NATO's repression of anti-colonial and anti-imperialist movements, particularly in Africa, NATO's long and extremely uncomfortable history of working with Nazis. They've done it for a long ass time. I've been reading about it. I'm like, God damn. Y'all thought you told the world that you defeated the Nazis after World War II, and people gave them jobs and made them the head of NASA, made them God damn it. So this current arming of Nazis in the Ukraine has a very, very old history when it comes to the US and NATO. So we're gonna be talking about that. We're also gonna be talking about how the economic sanctions applied on Russia's oil and gas industry are going to lead to a push for more extraction in the Western Hemisphere on indigenous people's land. This is how it works. They stop buying Russian oil and they say, okay, so we can't get that oil. That means we have to drill here. We have to drill in Tiwa territory. We have to drill in DNA territory. At the same time as indigenous peoples are organizing frontline defenses of the land and the water, the U.S. is planning more extraction to offset the loss of Russian oil. This is what the sanctions are a pretext for. So we're going to talk about that. And then we're also going to talk about what it looks like to organize a movement among the people in the United States to call for de-escalation in this situation. Again, it's not about taking a side, like the really hot person said. It's not about deciding like who is good or bad. It's really about understanding the political positions of the parties involved and how they can be influenced to move towards peace, period. So yeah, that's the Abolish NATO. Again, that teach-in is happening. I didn't actually say the date. So the teach-in is happening on Friday, March 18th. So next week at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. It's going to be virtual. And you can actually register for that teach-in on the link that I'm going to drop in the chat right now. Let me find it. Hold on. I wish I could have put the picture up, but I'm still getting used to this this platform. We're using a different platform than we usually do. So here's the link to register for the teach-in organized by the Albuquerque Anti-War Coalition and the Red Nation. Please register and join us next Friday, March 18th, 6 p.m. Mountain Time to learn even more detail about what I'm very, very quickly trying to explain to you right now. Please. It's going to be a very good time. I'm very excited. The APRP is going to present on the political historical context alongside Dr. Sharice Burton-Steady and Jackie Lukman from Black Alliance for Peace. It's going to be like a magical experience. Like if you know them, then you know how great it's going to be. So please register for the teach-in next Friday, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Anywho, we are over an hour, so I'm going to start to wrap it up. I want to make it clear it is still a pandemic, y'all. The leadership of the United States, both at the national and local level, is trying to act like it's over. The mask mandates are dropping. Everything is open. Remote work is ending. And thousands of people are still dying every single day from COVID-19 in the United States. At this point, nearly 1 million people have died from the pandemic in the United States. It is not over. It is ongoing. We are seeing the emergence of new variants, including BA1 and BA2, which are both as virulent as Omicron and as deadly as Delta. We are seeing these emerge just as mask mandates are ending all over the country. You do the math. Folks are about to get mollywopped as what's going to happen. So even though the governor of New Mexico rescinded the mask mandate here, I am still wearing a mask whenever I leave my house. Not just because I don't want to get COVID, especially long COVID, holy shit, but also because I don't want to make anyone in my community sick. And also because I understand this is an ongoing situation. The most recent scientific studies about the duration of the pandemic have said that we have at least 5 more years of COVID-19 if we continue on this present trajectory. And again, this is thousands of people dying from COVID still on a daily basis all over the United States. Those people are elders, those people are poor, those people are Africans, indigenous people. It is the most vulnerable segments, also disabled people. It is the most vulnerable segments of our society that are being left to fend for themselves during this pandemic. That is a deliberate political choice to allow those people to die. And so we don't actually have to tail the genocidal, the eugenicist logic of capitalism. We don't have to listen to these people trying to tell us it's fine now when we can clearly see people are still getting sick and dying. We can continue to mask up. We can continue to social distance. We can certainly get vaccinated and boosted if we have not done so and we feel comfortable doing that. But we also have to continue to organize in political organizations fighting for justice so we can build the kind of power we need to demand a pandemic response that is actually humanistic, that is actually life-centered. We don't have to actually let all these people die because the folks that we put in power have abandoned us. We actually have the power, if we are organized and moving collectively, to build a better solution, to demand a better solution. So we always say, like, if we want to survive COVID-19 and the pandemic that's coming after that, because capitalism is destroying the planet, then we must be active in organizations fighting for justice, organizations fighting for an economy, a society that's centered around life instead of around profit. And also, if we want a model of what a response like that could look like, we don't have to look any further than 90 miles off the southeast coast of the United States to the socialist nation of Cuba. That is like much, much, much poorer than the US empire, but somehow managed to not only develop 5 separate COVID-19 vaccines, but also to control the spread of the virus and provide its citizens with comprehensive medical care for free that allowed them to survive the pandemic. They suspended bills. They did door-to-door doctor's visits. They did deliveries of food. They actually took care of their people in a rational way. When the COVID-19 pandemic first hit, before there was any kind of vaccine, Cuba was sending doctors door to door, explaining to people what COVID-19 was, how to not catch it, what to do if you do catch it, testing people. Imagine if that had been done in the United States, how much confusion we could have avoided if people's like basic questions about what was happening was answered by a doctor. They even had access to a doctor. At the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, presidential candidates were saying absolutely no Medicare for all. Absolutely no nationalized healthcare. They were saying we are not going to provide you for health insurance during this pandemic, and we still voted for them because we don't understand that there is a better way that's possible and that there are examples in existence right now in places like Cuba, in places like Vietnam, in places like China. Even though China got smoked, China managed the pandemic extremely effectively and protected the lives of its population. So we have to look at examples of this being done in a better and more rational way and work to build that alternative here. We can't just let a million deaths of the most vulnerable people in our society just like go by like nothing. Do not let these people act like it's over. Do not let these people act like it's not a big deal. It's still happening. It's still ongoing. We have to protect each other. We have to organize. So this has been Weekly Pan-African News. We thank you so much for joining us. We do this show on the first and third Thursday of every single month, which means we're going to be back here on Thursday, March 24th at 1 p.m. Mountain Time. I believe the topic of that show is going to be solidarity between the African Liberation Movement and the Irish Liberation Movement, which might sound strange to you, but Ireland is straight up colonized by England. Their land has been stolen for hundreds of years. They were one of the first targets of European colonial virus. And so there has been a long-standing solidarity between the African liberation struggle and the Irish liberation struggle. We're going to talk about why that exists on Thursday, the 24th at 1 p.m. Mountain Time. So join us. So thank you so much for tuning in. If you are not active in an organization fighting for justice, we hope that you will join an organization fighting for justice. If you're an African, join the African People's Revolutionary Party. We love you. We want you. Come with us. We're great. So hit us up at aprpnewmexico@gmail.com if you're interested. If you're not African, congratulations. There are many, many, many organizations available for you, like the Democratic Socialists of America, like the Red Nation, like Black Rose, like the Industrial Workers of the World. There's so much. Just find one and help. If the organization you want to see does not exist, then start the organization you want to see in the world. You don't need any particular expertise. You don't need any kind of training. You don't actually need funding, even though we're told that we do. You just need 2 friends and a shared vision for how to change things. That's it. So join an organization. If the organization you want to see does not exist, start that organization and have a great rest of your day.